Hello, soul-igniting story fam. Buckle up because today's tale is packed with sweetness and swoon-worthy magic. Let's jump straight into the story. The French Quarter in New Orleans hummed with its familiar blend of jazz music and late-night revelry, but high above the bustling streets, in a penthouse that commanded views of the Mississippi River, silence ruled. This was the domain of Richard Voss, a name whispered in boardrooms from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, a man whose business empire stretched across 3 continents. At 52, Richard had everything money could buy. His penthouse was a masterpiece of modern luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows, artwork worth more than most people's homes, and a wine collection that could fund a small city's budget. Yet behind those expensive walls, Richard Voss was profoundly alone. The public knew him as the ruthless CEO who never smiled in interviews, the man who could make or break entire industries with single decision. Business magazines called him the Ice King of Commerce. But what they didn't see was how he spent his evenings, wandering through empty rooms that echoed with his footsteps, eating gourmet meals prepared by world-class chefs, while sitting at a table built for 12, completely by himself. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that like button if you've ever wondered what the ultra-rich are really like when nobody's watching. Richard employed a small army of staff to maintain his luxurious lifestyle. There was Marcus, his personal driver who never spoke unless spoken to. There was Chef Antoine, who prepared elaborate meals that Richard barely touched. There was his personal assistant, David, who scheduled every minute of his day but had never once asked how he was feeling. And then there was Maria. Maria Gonzalez had been cleaning Richard's penthouse for 3 years. She was a quiet woman in her 40s, a single mother who sent most of her earnings back to her family in Honduras. Unlike the other staff members, Maria had a warmth about her that seemed to fill whatever room she entered. She hummed softly while she worked, and sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she would quietly sing lullabies her grandmother had taught her. Richard had begun to notice these small moments. The way Maria would straighten his books with care, as if she understood they weren't just objects but treasured possessions. How she would water his plants with the gentleness of someone who truly cared about living things. Most remarkably, she was the only person in his employ who would look him directly in the eyes when they spoke, treating him not like a billionaire, but like a human being. As weeks turned into months, Richard found himself increasingly fascinated by this simple question. What were the people around him really like when they thought he wasn't watching? Did they mock him behind his back? Did they resent serving someone so wealthy while they struggled to pay their own bills? Or worse, did they simply not think about him at all when their work was done? The thought consumed him. Here he was, a man who could analyze market trends and predict global economic shifts, yet he couldn't understand the hearts of the people who spent 8 hours a day in his home. That's when Richard made a decision that would change everything. He would test them, not with money or rewards, but with vulnerability. He would create a situation where his staff would reveal their true nature when they thought no consequences existed. The plan was risky, perhaps even reckless. But Richard had spent his entire life calculating risks and rewards, and this felt like the most important experiment he'd ever conducted. He would stage his own downfall, make himself appear weak, defenseless, and at their mercy. Then he would see who these people really were when they thought nobody else would ever know. What Richard didn't realize was that his test would expose far more than just his employee's character. It would reveal truths about wealth, power, and human nature that would shake him to his very core. Most importantly, it would show him that sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't found in bank accounts or stock portfolios, but in the unexpected kindness of strangers who have every reason to walk away. The stage was set. The players were in position. And on one fateful Tuesday night, when New Orleans slept and the penthouse stood silent except for the gentle hum of expensive air conditioning, Richard Voss would discover that everything he believed about human nature was about to be turned upside down. Tuesday evening arrived like any other in the Voss penthouse. Chef Antoine had prepared Richard's dinner, pan-seared duck with truffle reduction, and departed by 7 p.m. Marcus had been dismissed after bringing Richard home from his final meeting. David had left detailed schedules for the following day and locked the office door behind him. By 8 p.m., the penthouse was empty except for Richard, who sat in his study nursing a glass of 30-year-old scotch. But tonight was different. Tonight, Richard would become an actor in his own elaborate production. He had spent weeks planning every detail. The security cameras would be mysteriously malfunctioning, actually redirected to show loop footage from previous evenings. His personal phone would be switched off, and his emergency contact list temporarily deleted from the penthouse landline. Most crucially, he had scheduled Maria to come in for an unusual late-night cleaning session, telling her that he would be out of town, but that the penthouse needed to be perfect for an important business breakfast the next morning. Richard checked his watch, 9:47 p.m. Maria would arrive at 10 p.m. sharp. She was always punctual. He moved to his bedroom and began his transformation. First came the expensive suit, rumpled and stained with water to look like spilled alcohol. He messed his usually perfect hair and practiced stumbling around his room until his movements looked authentically intoxicated. The hardest part was the smell. He poured premium vodka over his shirt and dabbed some on his neck, wincing at the waste of such expensive liquor. Standing before his bathroom mirror, Richard barely recognized himself. Gone was the polished EO who commanded boardrooms. In his place stood a broken man who looked like he'd lost everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was spending considerable effort and planning to appear powerless. At exactly 9:58 p.m., Richard heard the elevator ding in his private lobby. Maria was early, as always. He quickly positioned himself in the main living area, sprawling on the marble floor near his expensive coffee table, one arm draped dramatically over his eyes, an empty vodka bottle placed strategically nearby. The sound of Maria's key in the lock made his heart race. This was it, the moment of truth. Would she help a man who appeared to be at his lowest point? Would she take advantage of the situation? Would she simply ignore him and focus on her work? Or would she reveal something else entirely? Mr. Voss? Maria's voice carried genuine concern as she entered the penthouse. Sir, are you home? I thought you were traveling. Richard remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing to appear unconscious, but not dangerously so. Through barely open eyes, he watched as Maria set down her cleaning supplies and approached him cautiously. Oh my God, she whispered, kneeling beside him. Mr. Voss, can you hear me? Her hands were gentle as she checked his pulse, her touch warm and caring. Richard fought the urge to respond. He needed to see what she would do when she believed he was completely helpless. Maria sat back on her heels, clearly debating her next move. Richard expected her to call 911 or perhaps contact his assistant David. Instead, she did something completely unexpected. She began talking to him. Mr. Voss, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to help you, Maria said softly, her accent making her words sound like a prayer. You're going to be okay. I promise. But instead of immediately calling for help, Maria first covered him with a throw blanket from his couch. She carefully lifted his head and placed one of his expensive silk pillows beneath it. Then she sat beside him on the floor, not in a chair, but right there on the cold marble, and began to speak in a voice so gentle it nearly broke Richard's carefully maintained composure. You know, Mr. Voss, I've been working for you for 3 years now, and I've watched you. I know you probably think the staff doesn't notice, but we do. We see how lonely you are. We see how you eat those beautiful meals by yourself, how you stand at those big windows looking out at the city like you're searching for something. Richard's chest tightened. Nobody had ever spoken to him this way, with such honest compassion. My grandmother used to tell me that the richest people are often the poorest in their hearts, Maria continued, gently adjusting the blanket around his shoulders. She said that money can build walls so high that love can't climb over them. But she also taught me that everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're at their lowest. Maria stood up, but instead of leaving a call for help, she began tidying the area around Richard. Not her usual professional cleaning, but the kind of gentle care one might show a sick family member. She dimmed the harsh lights, turned off the loud jazz music that had been playing, and even adjusted the air conditioning, because she'd noticed him shivering slightly. I'm going to make you some tea, she announced quietly. My grandmother's recipe. It helps with everything really. And then I'm going to call someone to help you. But first, you need to know that whatever happened tonight, whatever made you feel this way, It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Mr. Voss. You're never alone. As Maria's footsteps faded toward the kitchen, Richard lay on his marble floor, covered in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender fabric softener, and realized his carefully planned test was revealing something he hadn't expected to find. Pure, unconditional human kindness, offered freely to someone who appeared to have nothing left to give in return. The gentle clinking of porcelain from the kitchen told Richard that Maria was preparing something with the same care she brought to everything else. He could hear her humming softly, that same melody she sang while cleaning, the one that always seemed to fill his empty penthouse with warmth he'd forgotten existed. When Maria returned, she carried a simple ceramic mug that looked completely out of place among his expensive crystal and fine china. The steam rising from it carried the scent of chamomile, honey, and something else, something that smelled like comfort itself. "This was my abuela's recipe," Maria said, settling back down on the floor beside him. She gently lifted Richard's head and helped him take small sips of the warm tea. "She made it for me when I was scared, when I was sad, when I thought the world was too big and I was too small. She said it had magic in it, but really, I think the magic was just that someone cared enough to make it." Richard had tasted teas from the finest plantations in the world, blends that cost more per ounce than Maria made in a day. But nothing had ever tasted like this. Like safety, like being cared for, like coming home to a place he'd never been. "My abuela would have liked you," Maria continued, dabbing his forehead with a cool, damp cloth she brought from the kitchen. "She always said she could see people's hearts, not their wallets. She would have seen that underneath all this expensive stuff, you're just a man who forgot how to let people love him." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. In all his years of therapy sessions with high-priced psychiatrists, in all the self-help books he'd secretly read, in all the moments of self-reflection during sleepless nights, no one had ever articulated his deepest wounds so simply, so accurately. "You know what I think happened tonight?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think you got tired. Tired of pretending that having everything means you need nothing. Tired of being strong for everyone else when nobody's being strong for you." Richard's carefully controlled breathing began to falter. Maria noticed immediately. "It's okay," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to pretend with me. I see you, Mr. Voss. Not the billionaire, not the boss, just you. And you're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to need someone." For the first time in decades, Richard Voss began to cry. Not the silent tears of frustration he'd shed in private boardrooms, or the angry tears of betrayal after business deals gone wrong. These were the deep, soul-shaking tears of a man who had built walls so high he'd forgotten there was a world outside them. Maria didn't try to stop him or comfort him with empty platitudes. Instead, she simply stayed. She sat on that cold marble floor, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, and let him break apart in a way he'd never allowed himself before. "When my husband died," Maria said softly, her own voice thick with emotion, "I thought I would never stop crying. I was angry at God, angry at the world, angry at everyone who still had their person when mine was gone. But my abuela, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, 'Mija, tears are not weakness. Tears are how the heart cleans itself, so it can love again.'" As Richard's sobs began to subside, Maria made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Mr. Voss, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something I probably shouldn't say, but I think you need to hear it." Richard opened his eyes, looking at her through his tears. "I know you think we don't see you, the real you, but we do. At least I do. I see how you stand at that window every morning with your coffee, looking out at the city like you're searching for something you lost. I see how you never finish those beautiful meals because you're eating alone. I see how you buy expensive art, but never look at it because it can't look back." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "And I see how kind you are, even when you think nobody's watching. Like when you found out Marcus's daughter needed surgery, and you quietly paid for it, making him think his insurance covered more than it did. Or when you discovered that Chef Antoine was sending money to his sick mother in France, and you gave him a raise but told him it was for improved performance. Richard's eyes widened. He'd been so careful to keep those acts of kindness secret, even from his own accountant. You think you're fooling people by acting cold and distant, Maria continued, but kindness has a way of showing itself. It leaks out around the edges, no matter how hard you try to hide it. The problem isn't that you don't have a good heart, Mr. Voss. The problem is that you don't think you deserve to be loved for it. The weight of Maria's words settled over Richard like a warm blanket. Here was this woman, someone he paid to clean his home, someone he barely had conversations with beyond polite greetings, and she saw him more clearly than anyone ever had. "Why?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "Why are you being so kind to me? I could fire you tomorrow. I could make your life difficult. You don't owe me anything." Maria smiled, and in that smile was everything Richard had been searching for without knowing it. Because that's what people do, Mr. Voss. Real people. When someone is hurting, you help them. Not because you have to, not because you'll get something back, but because it's right. Because we're all just walking each other home in this life. And sometimes someone stumbles. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Now, I'm going to call David and tell him you need someone tonight. Not because you can't take care of yourself, but because everybody needs somebody sometimes." As Maria dialed the number, Richard realized his test was over, but the results weren't what he'd expected. He hadn't discovered whether his employees were good or bad people. He discovered something far more profound. That true kindness exists without conditions, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who see us most clearly. The real test, he now understood, had never been about them. It had been about him. Richard woke up in his own bed, sunlight streaming through windows that seemed brighter than they had in years. For a moment, he wondered if the previous night had been an elaborate dream. But the ceramic mug on his nightstand, still faintly scented with chamomile and kindness, proved otherwise. David appeared in the doorway, concern etched across his usually professional features. "Richard, how are you feeling? Maria called me last night, and—" "She saved me," Richard interrupted quietly, sitting up slowly, "not from alcohol poisoning or any physical danger. She saved me from something much worse, from forgetting what it means to be human." David looked confused, but Richard was already reaching for his phone. There were calls to make, decisions that couldn't wait, and for the first time in decades, they had nothing to do with business. An hour later, Richard stood in his kitchen where Maria was quietly preparing his breakfast. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with the same gentle concern from the night before. "Maria," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years, "I need to tell you something. Last night, I wasn't really drunk." Her hand stilled on the coffee pot. She turned to face him fully, and Richard saw not anger or betrayal in her eyes, but understanding. "I know," she said simply. Richard's mouth fell open. "You knew?" "Mr. Voss, I've been cleaning up after people for 20 years. I know what real drunk looks like, and I know what expensive vodka smells like versus the kind that gets poured on shirts." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Besides, drunk people don't position themselves so carefully on marble floors, and they definitely don't control their breathing that precisely." "You knew it was a test?" Richard asked, amazement in his voice. "I suspected, but it didn't matter." Maria returned to preparing his breakfast with the same care as always. "Whether you were testing me or genuinely needed help, my response would have been the same, because that's who I choose to be, not just who I am when someone's watching." The profound simplicity of her words hit Richard like a revelation. She had passed a test she knew was a test, not by performing kindness, but by simply being kind. "Maria, I need to apologize," Richard said, sitting at the kitchen island where he'd never sat before. It had always seemed too informal, too human. "I had no right to test you that way. I was trying to understand if the people around me were genuine, but really, I was the one being fake." "Apology accepted," Maria replied, placing a perfectly prepared omelet in front of him. "But can I ask you something now?" Richard nodded. "What are you going to do with what you learned?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and an invitation rolled into one. Richard took a bite of his breakfast. Somehow it tasted better than any meal he'd had in years, even though it was the same chef, the same ingredients. The only difference was that he wasn't eating alone. "I'm going to change everything," he said finally, "starting with this." He pulled out his phone and began typing. Within minutes, he had transferred enough money to Maria's account to pay off her mortgage, fund her children's education, and secure her family's future for generations. "Mr. Voss, I can't," Maria started. "You can and you will," Richard said firmly. "But that's not the real change. The money is easy. The hard part is what comes next." Over the following weeks, Richard began dismantling the walls he'd built around his life. The penthouse remained his home, but it was no longer a fortress. He started eating his meals in the kitchen with whoever happened to be working. He learned Marcus's daughter's name and asked about her recovery. He discovered that Chef Antoine was actually a talented artist and commissioned him to paint a mural in the penthouse lobby. Most importantly, he began seeing Maria not as an employee, but as a friend she had always been. He just hadn't been open enough to notice. You know what the strangest part is? Richard told her one evening as they sat on his balcony, sharing tea and watching the sunset over New Orleans. "I spent my whole life trying to figure out who I could trust, who was real, who saw me for more than my money. But I was asking the wrong question. What should you have been asking?" Maria inquired. "Who was I being real with? How can anyone see the real me when I never showed them?" Richard smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "You didn't pass my test that night, Maria. You taught me that the test itself was wrong." Richard's transformation didn't stop with his personal relationships. He began restructuring his businesses to prioritize employee welfare alongside profits. He established scholarship funds, not for tax breaks, but because Maria had shown him that investing in people was the only investment that truly mattered. He started hosting dinners in his penthouse, not for clients or board members, but for his staff and their families. The sound of children's laughter began to fill rooms that had echoed with silence for too long. If this story is touching your heart, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell, because the best stories about human kindness are the ones we share. Months later, as Richard stood at his favorite window overlooking the city, he was no longer searching for something he'd lost. He had found it, not in Maria's kindness, but in his own willingness to receive it. Maria joined him at the window, as she often did during their evening conversations. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "That night, the test." Richard considered the question carefully. "I regret that I needed to test kindness to recognize it. I regret that I was so closed off that someone had to see me at rock bottom before I could see their goodness. But regret the night itself? Never." He paused, watching the lights twinkle across the city where millions of people were living their own stories of struggle and kindness, loneliness and connection. "That night taught me something no business school ever could. The richest person in the room isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the most love to give." Maria smiled, the same warm smile that had saved a broken man on a marble floor. My abuela would have liked that answer. "I wish I could have met her," Richard said. "You did," Maria replied softly. "Every time someone chooses kindness over judgment, every time someone sees a person instead of position, every time someone offers love without expecting anything back, that's her legacy living on." As the sun set over New Orleans, Richard Voss finally understood what he'd been searching for all those years. It wasn't success or recognition, or even love, really. It was a chance to be worthy of the kindness he'd always been too afraid to accept. The annual Christmas party at the Voss Foundation headquarters buzzed with laughter and conversation. But this wasn't the stiff corporate gathering of Richard's past. Children ran between tables while their parents, former employees who were now partners in Richard's transformed business ventures, shared stories and dreams for the future. Richard stood near the towering Christmas tree, but he wasn't alone. Maria was beside him, no longer wearing a cleaning uniform, but a beautiful dress that her daughter had helped her pick out. She was now the director of community outreach of the Voss Foundation, a position created specifically to channel her natural gift for seeing people's hearts. "Look at this," Maria said, gesturing toward a corner where Marcus was teaching a group of teenagers how to change a tire. "Remember when you thought he was just the quiet driver?" Richard laughed, a sound that had become common in his life. I remember thinking everyone was hiding their true selves from me. Turns out, I was the one wearing the mask. Across the room, Chef Antoine was setting up an art display featuring paintings created by employees' children. David was leading a financial literacy workshop for young adults. Even the security guards were engaged in animated conversations with families they now knew by name. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Richard told Maria, watching the scene unfold. "She's here," Maria replied simply. Every time someone chooses connection over isolation, every time wealth is used to lift others up instead of building walls, that's her spirit at work. As the evening wound down, Richard found himself back on his penthouse balcony with Maria, their traditional spot for evening conversations. The city sparkled below them, but it no longer felt distant and separate. It felt like home, not just his home, but everyone's home. "Do you remember what you asked me that first night?" Richard said, breaking a comfortable silence. "You asked what I was going to do with what I learned." Maria nodded, sipping the chamomile tea that had become their evening ritual. "I thought the answer was about changing my business, donating money, being nicer to employees," Richard continued. "But the real answer was much simpler and much harder. I had to learn to receive love." "That's the hardest lesson for successful people," Maria agreed. "You're so used to being the one with power, with resources, with solutions. But love isn't a transaction. It's a gift that only works when you let yourself receive it." Richard pulled out his phone and showed Maria a text message. It was from Marcus's daughter, now fully recovered from her surgery, sending him a picture of her first day at the college Richard's Scholarship Fund had made possible. "Thank you for seeing my worth when I couldn't see it myself," the message read. "You changed my family's entire future." "But here's what she doesn't understand," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "She had worth all along. I just finally learned to recognize it. The real gift wasn't the money I gave. It was the love her family taught me to accept. You know what I realized?" Richard continued, leaning against the balcony railing. "Everyone has a Maria in their life. Someone who sees them clearly, who offers kindness without conditions, who's ready to sit on a cold floor and make tea when the world falls apart. But most people, like I, was too proud, too scared, or too closed off to let that love in." Maria set down her teacup and looked at him seriously. "So what would you tell those people? The ones who are still building walls instead of bridges?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "I'd tell them that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the price of admission to real life. I'd tell them that the people who love you at your lowest aren't trying to take advantage of you. They're showing you who you really are underneath all the armor." He paused, looking out over the city where millions of people were living their own stories of connection and isolation. "Most importantly, I'd tell them that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems unnoticed. Maria, you were kind to me for 3 years before that night, in small ways I was too blind to see. Those little moments, the way you straightened my books, watered my plants, looked me in the eye when you spoke, they were preparing both of us a moment when I finally became ready to receive them. Before we finish this incredible story, I need you to do something. Think about the Maria in your life, the person who sees you clearly, who offers kindness without expecting anything back. When's the last time you really let them know how much that means to you? Drop a comment below and tell us about that person. Let's celebrate the Mariahs of the world." Richard stood up, extending his hand to Maria. "Come on, there's one more thing I want to show you." They walked inside to Richard's study, where a new addition dominated one wall, a simple wooden plaque with gold lettering. It read, "In memory of Maria's grandmother, who taught us that the heart's capacity for love is the only true measure of wealth." "I had this made," Richard explained, "because I realized something that night when I was lying on the floor feeling sorry for myself. I kept thinking about how alone I was. But I wasn't alone. Your grandmother's love was there with us. In your voice, in your hands, in your choice to see my humanity when I couldn't see it myself." Maria wiped away tears, running her fingers over the inscription. "She always said love multiplies when you give it away," Maria whispered. "I think she'd be proud of how much hers has multiplied." Richard nodded. 2 years ago, I thought I was testing whether people could be trusted with my vulnerability. But the real test was whether I could be trusted with their love, whether I could receive it, honor it, and pass it on. He looked around his study, once a sterile monument to his achievements, now filled with photos of friends, artwork from employees, children, and thank you notes from scholarship recipients. The night you found me on that floor, you didn't just save me from loneliness, Maria. You taught me that love isn't something you earn or buy or achieve. It's something you allow. And once you allow it, it changes everything. As Maria prepared to leave that evening, Richard walked her to the elevator, something he'd started doing every night, because goodbyes matter when people matter. Richard, she said, using his first name as she had every day since their friendship began. What do you think your life would have been like if you'd never done the test? Richard considered this seriously. I think I would have died rich and alone, surrounded by beautiful things and empty relationships. I would have been successful by every measure that doesn't actually matter. The elevator arrived, but Maria didn't step inside immediately. And now, she asked. Richard smiled, the genuine smile that had replaced his practiced corporate expression. Now I know the difference between having everything and having enough. Having enough means having people who care about you not for what you can give them, but for who you are when you have nothing left to give. As the elevator doors closed, Richard returned to his balcony one final time. The city below was full of people just like he used to be. Successful, driven, accomplished, and profoundly lonely. People who had everything except the one thing that made everything else worthwhile. But it was also full of people like Maria. Quiet heroes who chose kindness daily, who saw through facades of frightened humans underneath, who understood that love was the only currency that increased when spent. If this story changed how you see success, wealth, or kindness, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe if you want more stories that remind us what really matters. And remember, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind. Always be kind. The last shot of Richard's penthouse showed not expensive artwork or luxury furnishings, but something far more valuable. A simple ceramic mug on a marble counter. A reminder that the most precious things in life often come in the humblest packages, offered by the gentlest hands, to hearts finally brave enough to receive them. Love, it turns out, was the only test that mattered. And the only way to pass it was to stop testing and start trusting. 6 months after Richard shared his story publicly for the first time at a business conference, something extraordinary began happening. Letters started arriving at the Voss Foundation. Not requests for money or business proposals, but personal stories from people around the world who have been touched by Richard and Maria's experience. The first letter came from Tokyo, written by a CEO named Hiroshi, who had fired his entire cleaning staff after finding one of them sleeping in his office break room. After hearing Richard's story, he tracked down the woman he'd dismissed and discovered she'd been working 3 jobs to support her sick mother while sleeping at the office to save on transportation costs. He not only rehired her, but created an employee assistance program that became a model for companies across Japan. From London came a letter from Margaret, a wealthy widow who had been suspicious of everyone since her husband's death, convinced they only wanted her money. Inspired by Maria's unconditional kindness, she began volunteering at a local homeless shelter. I learned that the best way to tell who's genuine, she wrote, is to be genuine yourself first. But perhaps the most powerful letter came from right there in New Orleans, from a janitor named Robert who worked in the same building where Richard held his business meetings. Mr. Voss, Robert's letter began, I've been cleaning offices for 30 years, and I've always been invisible to the executives who work in them. But your story made me realize something. Maybe I was making myself invisible because I thought that's what they wanted. Robert went on to describe how he had started leaving small, encouraging notes in executives' offices. Nothing intrusive. Just simple messages like, hope your presentation goes well today, or thanks for always saying good morning. The response shocked him. These powerful business people started actually seeing me. Robert wrote, they learned my name, asked about my family, and one even helped my grandson get an internship. But the biggest change was in me. I stopped thinking of myself as just a janitor and started thinking of myself as someone who makes other people's days a little brighter. Richard immediately invited Robert to lunch, not as a photo opportunity or charity gesture, but as one human being wanted to meet another. What started as a simple meal became a monthly tradition, and Robert's insights about human nature from his unique perspective became invaluable to Richard's understanding of authentic leadership. Perhaps the most unexpected development was what Maria began calling the Maria Network, a loose community of people who had heard their story and committed to act of everyday kindness without expectation of recognition or reward. Teachers began staying after school to help struggling students, not for performance reviews, but because they remember Maria sitting on a marble floor with someone who needed help. Business owners started learning their employees' names and stories, not for productivity gains, but because they understood that seeing people clearly was a gift worth giving. A hospital worker in Chicago wrote to describe how she began bringing homemade soup to grieving families, remembering Maria's grandmother's tea and its power to heal hearts along with bodies. A teenager in Seattle started a program visiting elderly neighbors, inspired by Maria's belief that everyone deserves kindness, especially when they seem to need nothing. The Maria Network is still growing today. If you've been inspired to show unexpected kindness to someone, share your story in the comments. Let's prove that small acts of love can change the world one person at a time. 3 years after that pivotal night, Richard received a video call from a woman in rural Nebraska named Patricia. She was standing in front of a newly built community center, surrounded by smiling faces of all ages. "Mr. Voss," she said, "I wanted you to see this. After I heard your story, I realized I'd been hoarding my late husband's life insurance money out of fear. But Maria's example taught me that love multiplies when you give it away." This community center serves 3 farming towns now. We have job training, childcare, elder programs, and a commercial kitchen where Maria's grandmother's tea recipe is served every day. Patricia's voice broke with emotion. None of this would exist if you hadn't been brave enough to share how one woman's kindness saved your life. That kindness is still saving lives, just in different ways. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, a behavioral psychologist at Tulane University, had been following the ripple effects of Richard's story for her research on kindness and social change. Her preliminary findings were remarkable. We've documented over 2,000 direct acts of kindness that people attributed to hearing Richard and Maria's story, she explained during a video call with Richard and Maria. But the secondary effects, the kindness inspired by those acts of kindness, suggests we're looking at tens of thousands of positive human interactions that might never have happened otherwise. Dr. Rodriguez paused, consulting her notes. What's most fascinating is that these aren't grand gestures or expensive charity. They're simple human connections. People choosing to see each other, to help without being asked, to love without conditions. Maria, your grandmother's wisdom about love multiplying? We now have data proving she was scientifically correct. As Richard and Maria sat in their usual evening spot on the balcony, Maria posed a question that would stay with Richard forever. "Do you think we'll ever know the full impact of that night?" she asked, watching the sunset paint New Orleans in shades of gold and purple. Richard considered this carefully. "I hope we never do," he said finally, "because if we could measure it all, contain it all, understand it all, then maybe it would stop growing. Some things are meant to be infinite." He looked at the ceramic mug in his hands, the same one Maria had used that first night, now a permanent fixture in their evening ritual. "Your grandmother started something that night that she never lived to see. Her kindness, passed through you to me, is now traveling around the world in ways we can't track or control. That's not a story with an ending, Maria. That is a story that keeps writing itself, one act of love at a time. This is your invitation to be part of a story that never ends. Whether you're a CEO or a janitor, a student or a grandparent, you have the power to change someone's life with kindness. The question isn't whether you're important enough to make a difference. The question is, will you choose to see the person right in front of you who needs what only you can give? Start today. Start right now. The world is waiting for your version of Maria's kindness. And somewhere in New Orleans, the descendants of a wise grandmother's love continue to multiply, one gentle act at a time. Today, Richard Voss stands before the United Nations General Assembly, but he's not there as a billionaire businessman. He's there as a human being who learned the most important lesson of his life from a woman the world would have overlooked. 5 years ago, he tells the assembled leaders, I thought power meant having control over others. I thought wealth meant accumulating more than everyone else. I thought success meant never showing weakness. The audience of world leaders, diplomats, and change makers listens intently as Richard continues. But on one night in New Orleans, a woman named Maria taught me that real power is the ability to receive love. Real wealth is having people who care about you for who you are, not what you own. And real success? Real success is being brave enough to let others see your humanity. Behind him, a massive screen displays photos from around the world. The Community Center in Nebraska, the Employee Assistance Program in Tokyo, Robert's Mentorship Initiative, and hundreds of other projects born from that single night of authentic human connection. What the audience doesn't know is that Maria herself is watching from the first row, no longer as Richard's employee or even his friend, but as a co-founder of the Maria Gonzalez Foundation, an organization that has revolutionized how the world thinks about wealth, service, and human dignity. The foundation doesn't just give money to causes. It gives recognition to the overlooked heroes in every community. The janitors, the caregivers, the service workers, the quiet souls who make the world run on kindness rather than profit. We named scholarships after school custodians. Maria had explained to a reporter the week before. We named programs after nurses, aides, and grocery clerks, and bus drivers. Because my grandmother taught me that everyone has a name, everyone has a story, and everyone deserves to be remembered. The foundation's motto, inscribed in Maria's grandmother's handwriting on every plaque and certificate, reads simply, "Love multiplies when you give it away." Richard concludes his UN speech with words that will be quoted for generations. I challenge every leader in this room to find your Maria, not to test them, not to use them, but to learn from them. Find the person in your life who sees you clearly, loves you genuinely, and serves you faithfully, and ask yourself this question: when was the last time you truly saw them back? The camera captures world leaders wiping away tears, pulling out phones to text messages to people they've taken for granted, making notes about employees whose names they've never bothered to learn. Here's my challenge to you, right now, watching this video. Before you scroll to the next story, before you close this app, before you go back to your busy life, send a message to someone who has shown you kindness without expecting anything back. Tell them they matter. Thank them for seeing you. Let them know their love didn't go unnoticed. But here's the twist. Don't tell them this video inspired you. Don't make it about this story. Make it about them. Make it about the countless small ways they've made your life better that you never acknowledged. Because that's what Maria did for me. She didn't make her kindness about her. She made it about my need to be seen, to be valued, to be loved exactly as I was. As Richard and Maria walked together to the halls of the United Nations, they passed janitors, security guards, cafeteria workers, people who keep the world's most important building running while remaining largely invisible to the powerful people who work there. Maria stops to chat with each one, learning names, asking about families, offering the same warm attention she gave to a broken billionaire on a marble floor years ago. Richard watches, still learning, still amazed by her gift for seeing people clearly. You know what I realized? Richard tells her as they step outside into the New York sunset. That night changed me, but it didn't change you. You were always as kind, as genuine, this willing to love without conditions. I just finally became someone worthy of receiving it. Maria smiles, the same smile that saved a life and started a movement. My grandmother always said that love finds a way. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes decades, but love always finds someone ready to receive it and pass it on. She looks up at the United Nations building, where inside, world leaders are making phone calls and sending texts and planning policy changes inspired by the story of a billionaire and a maid who dared to see each other as human beings. So what happens next? Richard asks. The same thing that's been happening for 5 years, Maria replies. Someone, somewhere, chooses kindness over indifference. Someone sees a person instead of a position. Someone offers love without expecting anything back. And the story continues, one heart at a time. The story of Richard and Maria isn't really their story. It's ours. Every day, we get to choose whether we'll be the person who tests others or the person who loves them, whether we'll build walls or bridges, whether we'll hoard our hearts or give them away. Maria's grandmother was right. Love multiplies when you give it away. But it starts with you. It starts right now. It starts with whoever you're going to choose to truly see today. Don't let this be just another video you watched. Let this be the moment everything changed. Let this be the day you stopped waiting for others to show you kindness and started being the kindness others are waiting for. The world doesn't need more billionaires. The world needs more Mariahs. The question is, will you be one of them? 3 months after Richard's UN speech, something happened that neither he nor Maria could have predicted. A security camera video surfaced. Not from that pivotal night 5 years ago, but from just last week at a coffee shop in downtown New Orleans. The grainy footage shows Richard and Maria in line together, chatting like the old friends they become. When they reach the counter, the young barista, clearly overwhelmed by the morning rush and fighting back tears, apologizes for the wait. What happens next transforms an ordinary Tuesday into a global phenomenon. Maria, without hesitation, steps behind the counter. "Honey, you look like you need a friend," she says, gently taking the overwhelmed girl's hands. "What's your name?" The barista, shocked that customers are helping instead of complaining, whispers, "Jessica." "Well, Jessica, my name is Maria, and this is my friend Richard. We're going to help you through this rush, and then we're going to sit with you and make sure you're okay." For the next 20 minutes, the security footage captures a billionaire and a foundation director working behind a coffee counter. Richard surprisingly competent at operating the espresso machine, Maria naturally taking orders and making every customer smile despite the chaos. Someone in line recorded the entire scene on their phone. Within hours, the video had 50,000 views. By the end of the day, it had reached 2 million. The caption read, "This is what real wealth looks like. A billionaire and his friend stopping their day to help a struggling barista. No cameras, no publicity, just pure human kindness." But it was a follow-up video that broke the internet. Jessica, the barista, posted her own response video through tears of gratitude. "Those 2 angels didn't know that I've been working 3 jobs to pay for my mom's cancer treatment. I was about to quit because I couldn't handle the stress anymore. But they didn't just help me serve coffee. They reminded me that good people still exist." The video ends with Jessica holding up an envelope. They left this for me with a note that said, "For your mother, with love from Maria's grandmother's legacy." It's enough to cover all her remaining treatments. Within 48 hours, hashtag Maria Monday began trending worldwide. Every Monday, people started sharing videos of themselves helping service workers, sitting with lonely elderly people, or simply showing unexpected kindness to strangers. A CEO in Singapore posted herself cleaning bathrooms alongside her janitorial staff. A teenager in Detroit shared a video of taking soup to homeless encampments. A retired teacher in Iowa documented visiting nursing homes to read to residents who never get visitors. Here's the hashtag Maria Monday challenge. Every Monday, find someone who serves others and serve them back. Film it not for likes or followers, but to inspire others to do the same. Show the world that Maria's grandmother was right. Love multiplies when you give it away. Dr. Sarah Kim, a digital anthropologist at Stanford, studied the hashtag Maria Monday phenomenon for her research on viral kindness movements. What's remarkable about this trend, she explained to a tech conference, is that it's the first viral challenge that consistently creates long-term behavioral change. We're seeing sustained acts of kindness weeks and months after people first participate, not just the initial burst of activity typical of internet trends. The algorithm-driven world that usually promoted division and anger suddenly found itself amplifying love and connection. Social media platforms, usually criticized for their negative impact on society, became vehicles for spreading genuine human compassion. The coffee shop video also had an unexpected consequence. Viewers began recognizing other people in the background, customers who had witnessed the kindness firsthand. One of them was Robert, the janitor whose story had become part of Maria Network legend. "I was getting my morning coffee when I saw them help that girl," Robert shared in his own response video. But here's what the camera didn't capture. After they finished helping Jessica, Mr. Richard came over to my table. He said, "Robert, I hope you know that your example taught me as much as Maria's did. Thank you for showing me that kindness doesn't require permission. Robert's voice broke with emotion. 5 years ago, I thought I was invisible. Today, I have over 100,000 people following my daily acts of kindness. Not because I'm special, but because two people taught me that everyone has something valuable to offer. As the video's impact continued to grow, reaching over 100 million views across all platforms, Maria and Richard found themselves back on a balcony where so many of their important conversations had taken place. Do you think your grandmother ever imagined her love would reach this far? Richard asked, scrolling through thousands of hashtag Maria Monday posts from around the world. Maria laughed, the sound carrying the same warmth that had saved a broken man years ago. She always said that kindness was like planting seeds. You never know which ones will grow into forests. She pointed to Richard's phone, where stories were still pouring in from every continent, every culture, every walk of life. Look at this forest we helped plant. But Richard, the most beautiful part is that we can't take credit for it. These are people choosing kindness because they recognize it when they see it, not because we told them to. The camera is always rolling now. Not just security cameras, but the eyes and hearts of everyone around you. Every act of kindness, every moment of genuine human connection has potential to change someone's entire worldview. So here's your final challenge. Live like Maria lives. Love like her grandmother loved. See people like they deserve to be seen. Not because someone might be recording, not because it might go viral, but because that's who you choose to be when no one's watching. Because in a world full of cameras and algorithms and endless digital noise, the most radical thing you can do is simply be genuinely, consistently, unconditionally kind. The story started with a test. It's ending with a truth. Love always wins. Always. The bronze statue stands in the heart of New Orleans, but it doesn't depict a famous politician or war hero. Instead, it shows two figures sitting together on a marble floor, a woman in work clothes offering tea to a man in a rumpled suit. The inscription reads simply, "To every Maria in every household, every office, every corner of the world, you are seen, you are valued, you matter." Today marks the 10th anniversary of that pivotal night, and thousands have gathered not to celebrate wealth or power, but to honor the quiet heroes who keep the world running on kindness. Richard Voss, now in his 60s with silver hair and laugh lines earned through years of genuine joy, stands before the crowd. But he's no longer the focal point of the story. 10 years ago, he begins, "I thought this was a story about me learning to be humble, but I was wrong. This was always a story about Maria teaching the world to see clearly." The statistics are staggering. The Maria Network now operates in 847 cities across 94 countries. Over 12 million people have taken the See Someone Challenge, committing to truly notice and appreciate one service worker each day. Employee satisfaction rates at companies implementing Maria principles have increased by an average of 340%. Depression rates among service workers in participating communities have dropped by 60%. But the numbers that matter most can be measured. The lonely elderly person who now receives weekly visits, the overworked single mother who knows her name matters to someone, the janitor who finally believes his work has dignity. Maria Gonzalez, now Director Emeritus of the foundation bearing her name, takes the stage with a quiet grace that has changed millions of lives. "My grandmother never learned to read," she says, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. But she understood the most important truth in the universe. Love is not something you earn or deserve or achieve. Love is something you recognize, receive, and release. She pauses, looking out at faces from every background, every nation, every walk of life. She would be amazed to see all of you here today. But she wouldn't be surprised, because she always knew that kindness is contagious, that love multiplies, and that every single person has the power to change the world simply by choosing to see the person standing right in front of them. This is where your story begins. Not Richard's story, not Maria's story, but yours. Right now, someone in your life needs to be seen the way Maria saw Richard. Someone needs kindness the way he needed that cup of tea. Someone needs to know they matter the way Jessica needed to know she wasn't alone. You don't need to be a billionaire to change a life. You don't need a foundation or a platform or following. You just need to do what Maria did. See someone clearly, love them genuinely, and trust that your kindness will multiply in ways you'll never know. 10 years from now, what will your legacy be? Will you be remembered for what you accumulated or for what you gave away? Will your story be about what you achieved or about who you help achieve their dreams? Maria's grandmother started something she never lived to see completed because it never will be completed. Every day, in coffee shops and offices, in hospitals and schools, in the quiet moments when no one's watching, ordinary people are choosing extraordinary kindness. That's not just a story about the past. That's your invitation to the future. The question isn't whether you can make a difference. The question is whether you will. Because somewhere tonight, someone is lying on their own marble floor, maybe not literally, but emotionally, spiritually, completely alone. And tomorrow, you might be the Maria who sits beside them and says, "You're not alone. You're never alone." The greatest stories aren't the ones we watch. They're the ones we write with our lives, one act of love at a time. So what will your story say about you? What will your kindness multiply into? What will your love create in the world? The choice is yours. The time is now. The world is waiting. Be someone's Maria. Always. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this extraordinary story here on Soul Igniting Story. I truly appreciate you for taking the time to be with us, to open your heart, and to let these words spark something within your soul. Every story we share is crafted to inspire, to uplift, and to remind us all that love, hope, and resilience are alive in every corner of the world. If this story touched you, made you smile, or even brought a little spark of wonder to your day, I would be so grateful if you could show your support. Please give this video a like. It helps more souls discover these stories. Don't forget to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, or even your own experiences connected to the story. Your words make this community come alive. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next beautiful journey we'll be sharing together. Until next time, thank you again for being part of the Soul Igniting Story family, where every story lights a flame within,